please, we'll start. We're going to go, if anybody's heads up here, we're just going to go one at a time that way. So, sir in the blue. Please give us your name, your address, and your social security. No.
I've got 2 children. There's not enough in the bank for everybody to take. My name is Joseph Eugene. I live at 117 Jordan Drive here in Westchester. I'm in Pleasant Grove neighborhood that is to the northeast of 926. So I guess I have one question to the traffic study engineer and then just a couple of comments from the planning board. So I saw tonight and listened tonight about a lot of traffic studies that were done in the immediate roads that are going to touch this community. Has any road studies been done, traffic studies, in my case, to the neighborhood, affected neighborhood right across 926, Pleasant Grove?
So you'd have to speak to specific intersections, but our study covers the intersections that we have been required to study by the township and PennDOT.
Yeah, so I live on exactly right over that's the Pleasant Grove neighborhood. So I think, yeah, to your point, so the road studies are only the intersections that touch immediately to this community.
Generally speaking, yes. So I think the closest intersection we've been required to study in terms of your location would be the 202 Pleasant Grove Road intersection.
Okay, so for the planning commission, so just a few comments that I just wanted to make. I'll certainly come next Monday and make these comments as well. So I'm a resident now for 2 years in the community just adjacent to 926. And a couple terms I learned tonight, the term collector road and the concept of it. One of the plain reasons to do that is, we even said putting regional traffic through a residential area is really not good practice. So where I live on Fielding Drive, what I can tell you today is the amount of traffic, cut-through traffic that we get in our neighborhood from people trying to cut from 926 or from Pleasant Grove down through to the shopping center or vice versa. People that are coming up 202 and they need to head northeast into the community instead of continuing up 202, they cut through our neighborhood. So if I'm looking at approximately 320 homes that are going to be added, and I'm going to say roughly 2 cars per home, that's not out of the question. And if I say, oh, that 600 plus cars that will be added because of this community, and then just roughly look at it and say, what if 20% of those cars decide to cut through my neighborhood at peak hours, in the morning and in the afternoon? So that's about what, 120 cars, 130 cars, maybe over the course of 2 hours. So that's basically a car a minute. And I'm not exaggerating now. I'm telling you, during rush hour traffic in the morning, I get a car a minute. I get 2-3 cars a minute. So now I'm getting more. I have 2 young children that live on that street. That neighborhood was built in 1985. So many of the existing neighbors are starting to move out. More and more young children are moving in. And it's going to just increasingly be a problem. A couple other things that I heard, and actually I'll make sure that my neighbor comes in. So directly across from this planned community is the entrance to Pleasant Grove. That's Piedmont Drive. And there's a pond right there on the left-hand side. So during the rainstorms that we recently had over the last 18 months, we've got video of our friend's backyard half submerged in water. Rainwater is flushing through from the Crebilly farm underneath 202, passing through to go to, well, I guess the water retention, the rain pond. Our neighbors have contacted the township, and the township said, well, we don't own that, Crebilly Farm doesn't own that. So what I'm wondering now, that we're adding more hard structure, more hardscape, road houses, and so forth, what the environmental impact would be to our neighborhood as a result of that. So a lot of other things that I heard tonight, I'm gonna let the rest of the community talk, but certainly I hope these are the types of things that we think about when we talk about allowing another 320 homes.
Sir, thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
My name is Bill Bosberg. I live at 1151 Lake Drive in Westchester. That's about 23 mile west of New Street. So I travel 926 every day. To answer your question, 5 minutes is a short time on 926. I've had 20 minutes and even 25 once. So yes. My question is this for the traffic engineer. I'm not an engineer, I don't understand. We're putting 319 houses here and getting 600 some cars. I think the last thing you said, about 80% of the cars are going down 926 and up 202 north to being a question. how am I gonna get those 480 cars through there? That seems like an awful lot of cars. That's what I don't understand.
Cole?
So the amount of traffic that is generated by the development, we are required to utilize industry standard data from the Institute of Transportation Engineers. And so there's a specific amount of trips generated by this development during the morning and afternoon peak hours that we're required to study. And those are referenced in the traffic study, but I will quote them. And for the 319 homes, the mix as shown on the plan, during the morning peak hour, it's a total of 198 trips. And again, that's a 60-minute period. And in the afternoon 60-minute period, it's 259. And so we're required to analyze the impact of those trips throughout the roadway network. We developed the distribution patterns for that traffic based on the existing traffic counts, and it's consistent with previous studies approved by the township. And as a result, we have to look at the traffic impact that we have at each of our study intersections. We've done that, and as I mentioned this evening, have a series of improvements, which includes the collector road, and we are mitigating the traffic impact of this development with that package of improvements.
I would respectfully disagree, not that I know much about traffic engineering. She has 130 some trips an hour.
198 in the morning and 259 in the afternoon.
Per hour.
In a 60-minute period. We're required to look at the peak 60-minute period.
So in a 2-hour period, we've got 400 trips, basically 380. That's a lot of trips. And with all due respect, you didn't have to look at this, it's not on your property, but all these cars that come in 202 are not going to move. And the reason they're not going to move is you have that one-lane turnoff going up there just north of your thing. And until they fix that, nothing's going to move, period. And if you have a big truck day that day, you can't get on 202 from 926. If you have 8 or 10 semis. And I've seen it, and I had to go around some other way.
Thank you very much. I'm going to ask if the last two individuals, if you go to that side, you'll probably get there faster. Ma'am.
Okay. My name is Ann Healy, I live at 1164 Lake Drive, Hills neighborhood. I have questions I don't think anybody here has an answer to, but I want to point out a situation. At the corner of New Street and 926, Crebilly has one corner of that intersection. There's this historical home there that dates back to colonial times, I believe, on one corner. There's a historical farm in another quadrant, and then another serpentine house in the other. In order to make the turning lanes, I'm guessing that eminent domain would be imposed. These are historical pieces of property that we can and should not lose. I have real concerns about that. I'd like to know, is there any plan to look at how that can be done without impacting those historical properties?
Greg or Andrew?
We haven't done the detailed analysis yet, but we do believe the road widening will have significant impact on those homes if the right-of-way is acquired. So the answer to your question is you are right. There will be impact to those structures. We don't know what that would be yet.
Thank you. Another is from a former educator's point of view, 300 homes, one child is 300 children, 2 kids and 600 children that still have to be bused. That means bus stops. And I don't know, I'm sure study hasn't been done yet, but buses going in and out is going to slow down the traffic. Anybody who's ever had to follow a bus anywhere is very much aware of that. 3 levels of education, which is elementary, middle, and high school, is 3 different rounds of buses coming within a 2-hour period, which also slows down the traffic. I don't know where the bus stops would even be on that, the road that's being proposed, or the buses would be climbing into the neighborhood. But that is an impact and a safety issue that is is of great concern to me.
So let me ask, Nicole, if you have a comment about it, or Greg, if you want to comment, and Dr. Scanlon, if you have a comment about it at all, appreciate it.
Sure, from our end, we would be offering the roads for dedication. In order for the school district to have access, it would have to be a public roadway. That's up to the township to decide whether they're going to accept the roads. When we had our prior application, this is also another reason that we had considered why we don't believe having a high traffic regional collector road is appropriate. When you have children and buses, they don't mix well with heavy traffic or high speed traffic. But if to the extent the township would accept the roads, then we would allow for bus stops if the school district found that suitable within the internal roads of the development.
Third point, I'd like to let you keep all this in mind. A third point is we live on the corner of Lake Drive and 926. And I have stood out there on the corner counting cars going in both directions. The jam up is not simply going to King of Prussia. There's a tremendous amount of traffic going to and from towards the Chads Ford area and the Kennett Square area on 926. It's jam-packed both ways. At times from 6 a.m. in the morning until 9:30, and again later on from roughly 2:45 till about 5:30 p.m. So I think traffic studies should be going both ways, not just heading out towards 202, because it's a problem all the way down.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Jim, do you want to make a comment at all about anything to do about busing and the additional?
Well, with that new connector road, I don't know the distance from that connector road to the end of that development, but typically now we don't go into developments. If we can get access to the kids and do stops, we would probably do it along the connector road. But depending how many kids we get to stop, we may end up bringing buses in if there's too many kids.
Ma'am?
My name is Carol Weller. I live at 1150 Lake Drive, also a member of Neighbors for Crebilly. And I just wanted to bring up an environmental issue. My property has a rapidly run creek run through it and also a pond. I waded out into the creek and photographed 8 large trees that are clinging to the banks. I'm very concerned about what this massive development is going to do to this creek. So could I give it?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Ma'am?
My name is Crebilly. I live at Brandywine.
I'm going to ask you to just pull the microphone closer to you so we can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay. I live in Brandywine at Thornbury. Is it okay for me to talk now, or do you want me to wait?
Just go ahead. You're there.
Okay, I have 2 things I wanted to mention. The way the collector road is now, it's going to bring even more traffic than your last plan. Right across 926, right onto Bridlewood Boulevard, which is a small 2-lane road that goes through a residential development. We have bus stops, we have little kids who play, we have fields. I haven't heard anything about PennDOT or Toll Brothers doing anything about traffic calming methods going through there. I suppose you're not required by law, but you know, it's something that might make you good citizens if you thought about that at least. We're going to have not only the people coming from that development, but a lot of other people who already come through to avoid the mess at 202 and 926.
Well, allow Toll representatives to answer.
With previous conversations we've had with PennDOT, there was some discussion about potential traffic calming in Thornbury Township. They were just very preliminary. There was no decision on what would be done or could be done, and that's something that we'll address with PennDOT as the application moves forward.
Okay. And the other thing, but there is a possibility of that?
It's a potential.
Okay.
But there'd have to be cooperation by Thornbury.
Right.
They'd ultimately have to approve that.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
So just so to be clear, Westtown cannot impose any sort of condition because Westtown can't tell Thornbury what to do.
Oh, we understand that.
Okay, so make sure everybody
Understood
knows
that. Okay, the other things about historic houses that the last lady talked about, if PennDOT is involved in taking these houses, and since they're historic, doesn't PennDOT have to come up with an alternative plan to avoid taking the historic property?
I think it's important to note it's highly unlikely that PennDOT will condemn or exercise eminent domain. In my experience, PennDOT doesn't do any takings or condemnations unless it's part of a state highway project, and even then it's after long negotiations with property owners. Anything that PennDOT does with respect to historic structures usually falls under the Federal Protection, the NEPA program, which makes it close to impossible for PennDOT to do anything with a historic structure. So while there may be concern about that, I don't expect that to occur. I think what Al had said to Nicole was PennDOT would typically ask the developer to go see if they could get additional right-of-way, not condemn the structure, but take the structure. And if they can't, then there's other means in which you can mitigate traffic in a different way.
Both of those structures are very
They're
close to the road.
very close, and that's exactly what we were concerned about when we looked at it and did that aerial, that as the road widens, it really comes right up to the front, at least
Right.
one of the structures.
So you're going to try to leave the two houses?
Well, we're actually not proposing to do those improvements because it's not on our property. What we did was analyze what that impact would be for everybody here to be able to better digest, because we didn't do that analysis as part of the last application. And what it shows is exactly your concern, that it will have impact on these structures, some of which are potential historic.
What do you mean by impact?
Impact. So property that's historic in those instances tends to have some type of separation from the street. It's part of the overall curtilage of a residence. If you pull the road right up against the front of the structure, then you could be jeopardizing the structural integrity of that structure. So it would cause an impact. Having said that, you know, there's some ground that's available that's within right of way, and PennDOT may say, okay, we'll do something less than what's required, and they may sign off on that. They may also say, don't do anything, change the signal timing, put in a right turn lane, and do something else somewhere along that pathway. So those are the discussions that we would have to have with PennDOT, and the township would be involved, and I believe Thornbury Township would also have to be involved because they have the other half of the intersection.
Right.
Ma'am, I'm going to stop you there.
Okay, thank you.
Ma'am, go.
Hi, Michelle Ritchie Barbicane. I live in the Arbor View development right off of West Pleasant Grove Road. So Orbis Way, West Pleasant Grove Road, South New, 202, and 926 are all right around me. The proximity is frightening when I think about this impact. I had an event, a family event, and had cousins from out of town, 2 from Florida and 1 from Georgia, just 2 weeks ago, and they were saying what a beautiful area I lived in, and how fortunate I was to live in an area, because from my development, Crebilly is right across the street, and you just see the rolling hills and the green. And I think it took about 2 more days when they started to notice the traffic patterns and how difficult it was. So I went into the whole story with them about the proposed development, and they had the insight to say, wow, what's that going to do to traffic issues? And I'm not negating any of the professional studies that you did, but to me it's just common sense that with additional homes and cars and people and school buses, that the traffic is only going to get considerably worse. People try to get off of 202 now and they cut down West Pleasant Grove Road all the time. There's a school bus stop there. You really take your life into your hands trying to pull out of my development, to say nothing of the fact that there are deer all over that road. So I'm just having trouble grasping that whole concept. I have to say that I served for 2 years on a planning committee under the Planning Commission for a 10-year plan. And this township really dropped the ball years and years ago about trying to do land preservation and having the insight and the wherewithal to realize that this was going to be the inevitable. So we lost a lot of our chances by elected officials from years ago, and so I only hope that currently we don't allow this to go any further, or we at least try to
slim down the development so that we're not just losing everything that should have been protected a while ago. And then lastly, I just have to say to Toll, I said, I don't understand why you chose to be down there in the corner instead of on the stage addressing us. If you were sitting back here, all we could hear was a voice. I felt like I was in the Wizard of Oz and that you guys were behind the curtain. I just think it would have been more professional to be up on the stage and address your audience.
I don't think that's a fair comment, ma'am.
Well, it felt like that. So
Well,
to
I'm
me,
sorry you felt like that, but we were asked to stay down here and not be on the stage, and I don't like the insinuation that I would be disrespectful to this crowd or this public, because throughout this entire process, we've been nothing but respectful to all of the public.
Okay, well, I'm glad you said that because I felt disrespected.
Well, I'm sorry
Thank
you
you.
feel that way.
Sir.
Yeah, my name is Tony Zukovich, 821 Kimberly Lane. About a mile over the hill. Been here for about 38 years. And a question I have for the traffic folks. What were the peak hours or hours that you used in the data?
So we were required to count from 7 to 9 a.m. and from 4 to 6 p.m. and study the peak hour at each individual intersection during that time period.
And that was Monday through Friday?
The township code requires that traffic counts be done on a Thursday or Friday between the months of April and November. So we must conform to that criteria.
So it was 2 days a week and not the weekends at all?
That is what is required. That is required by what is required by township code.
Did any of those days, the Thursdays or Fridays, that you looked at coincide with any holidays at all?
No, we are required as a standard practice to avoid holidays.
And a follow-up question, to supplement the data, the raw data that you had, the numbers data, were there any eyeball tests done? You actually stationed yourself at those locations and looked at the traffic that was coming by in those hours?
Yes, so we often use video equipment to collect our traffic counts. And at these locations, we also had eyes on the ground, particularly along the 202 corridor to capture the queues and delays along those routes. So yes, we implemented those techniques.
And then just a finishing comment. In all the planning I've done over the years and meetings I've been involved in, I think there's a thing called resident equity. And I think all these people that are here, the ones that left, have skin in the game here as equity in this township. And at the end of the day, I would just like to know, how is this going to make this township better? What do we get out of it, if anything?
Fair play. Sir.
My name is Myron Brewell. I live at 1024 Dunblade Road. A few comments. Is this new application under the new land development plan that was approved? I think you said in March. Somebody else said it was approved in July. In this meeting, it was approved in March, correct?
Two different things. The comprehensive plan was updated in March of 2019, but there was a zoning amendment that was adopted in August. This plan was filed before that new zoning amendment.
Well, why would it, okay, so this new plan is not covered under the
This new plan is vested under the old ordinances. So they filed it specifically because they knew the board was going to be adopting amendments that they would be impacted by.
Why wouldn't it be under the development?
Because the way the law reads, as Mr. Edelman tried to explain, is that when the MPC says if you file a conditional use application, your application is evaluated based on the ordinances in effect as of the date you file the application.
Myron Township didn't make the right deadline.
Well, I wouldn't say it that way. I mean, Toll was always keeping track of what was happening. So Toll was going to file a plan regardless of what day the board passed an ordinance.
So
They knew they had to vest the plan.
They beat the deadline
Yeah.
in a different way.
Right.
Testimony that was presented for the previous application, such as the mitigate or the consequences to the Westchester School District, the bill that the Westchester School District wants to present, I believe it's been presented already. The battlefield.
This is all new hearing, starting over.
Any of that
starting over. It depends on how Mr. McKenna and Mr. Edelman, handle whether they're going to allow incorporation of prior testimony. I don't believe that's going to be the case. So we have to act as if the first hearing did not happen.
Okay.
But that will be determined by Pat McKenna, who represents the supervisors. They're running the hearing.
Okay, so that means that, and this is all in a compressed time period now, right? We don't
No.
have the extension.
No, it's not in a compressed time frame, sir. To conduct the first hearing was in a compressed time frame. The first time they filed their conditional use application, they waived the 60-day time frame for the board to start the hearings. That's what they're not willing to do. How long the hearings last will depend upon how long the applicant takes to present their case, how many parties there are, and how much evidence the parties want. The law does have a certain time frame. I think it's 100 days to complete your application, and the same number of days for the parties. So I wouldn't say it's a compressed hearing.
Okay, all right. Thank you for that.
Sure.
What I don't understand is we still have a plan, Toll Brothers, that's sitting in the courts.
Right.
How can we be here? How can the law allow, that's an endless question. How can we be here with another plan when the first one hadn't even been decided? It's probably legal, but it's not right.
So you say it's not right because you're looking at it and saying you want to find out what happens on the first plan. We're saying it's right because it protects the property rights that otherwise would be taken away as a result of the zoning amendment that the supervisors passed. So there's a balance, and that balance is what the law affords. It may not be equitable in the minds of people who don't want it approved, but if you're supposed to protect the rights that are inherent under the Constitution of this Commonwealth, and that's what that does.
But what about my rights? My rights are being abridged with all the extra traffic, and I don't care what your traffic. You go out and sit in 202 traffic at 6:30, 7 o'clock in the morning. And you told me it's not going to get worse.
I understand that's why you have a public forum, and that's why you have the ability to speak out in a public hearing.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Ma'am.
I'm Jennifer Kramer. I live at 1046 Dunvegan Road. You mentioned during the traffic study that data on one of the intersections was older than 3 years old. Which intersection was that?
In this study, we expanded the intersections along 202 to include the Stetson-Skiles Boulevard intersection because of the Orvis Way connection. That count was older than 3 years.
Okay, do you have any data on the intersection at Skiles and 202 with the increased traffic from Orvis Way?
It isn't open yet, so we have estimated numbers based on the study that was approved for that development, but as I mentioned earlier, it will be important to do new counts once Orvis Way is open and traffic has started to utilize it, meaning don't count it the day it opens, let traffic get used to it, and then we'll have a much better understanding of how traffic is choosing to use it. All we can do at this point is estimate.
What is the estimate for that intersection?
For which intersection?
Skiles Boulevard and 202?
So there are changes at that intersection that will occur when the development opens. The development meaning the one that's currently being constructed by others. There's also traffic that will be added by this development. So all of that is detailed very specifically in the traffic study. There's a lot of pieces to that question. So it does cover specifically in the study what the change in volume at that intersection is from existing to without and to with development conditions. There's several pieces to that. So it increases with other approved developments. It changes because of the Orvis Way connection, and then there is traffic added by the development.
Do you have an estimated letter grade for that intersection?
Yes, so at the intersection of 202 and Skiles Boulevard, Stetson, So with the development, we show that overall the intersection will continue to operate acceptably at a level of service D during both peak hours.
Okay. And one more question. Do you have data on the intersections along the collector road?
We have estimates of the traffic that will be generated at each of those intersections, and we also have traffic analysis in the study for each of those intersections. All of those intersections, as designed on the plan and based on the estimated traffic in accordance with the standards, will operate acceptably.
Okay. Remind me what acceptably is?
In an urban area such as this, level of service D as in dog or better is acceptable. I believe those intersections function even better than that, and I'm just flipping to those results so I can quote it accurately. So all of those intersections will generally operate at level of service B as in boy or better on the individual movements.
And one final question. I live directly north of this development. Do you have any data of the amount of traffic that will be redirected through South Hills development or up New Street and through Jacqueline Drive?
So we were not required to study those intersections.
Okay. So you have no data on the northbound traffic?
We were not required to study those intersections.
Ma'am,
Jillian Fitzpatrick.
you have to speak loud.
Jillian Fitzpatrick, 319 West Minor Street. You still can't hear me? Okay. So my questions really are to the Planning Commission at first. Will your traffic engineers be doing their own studies to combat these numbers as we had in the original?
And they didn't do their own study, they evaluate what's presented.
Okay.
And they provide recommendations.
Okay, so I guess I would ask, I know in the previous conditions that were supposed to be part of, if the conditions were approved, that they would put money in escrow for traffic calming measures. Is there a way to add that condition this time, but more for what happens when these predictions are wrong? Because we know they're wrong. The people sitting in this crowd have told you that repeatedly tonight. We know this data is not accurate, and there will absolutely be impact to these intersections. So is there a way to retroactively go back and have that money already setting aside to go in and make changes to these intersections? Because that's what needs to happen. Because what we're seeing now all around this area is that these guys walk away with millions of dollars, and then the taxpayers are left footing the bill for the infrastructure that needs to be updated after they leave. The other thing is that...
You want an answer first? Okay. Al, you want to answer them?
Well, I'll answer it. You can't have conditions that aren't based on substantial credible evidence. So unless there's somebody brings a traffic expert that says that those conditions are needed in order to prevent detrimental impact to public health, safety, welfare, it's not a lawful condition. And with respect to traffic, you can't base a denial on increased traffic for land use. So the ordinance, the township ordinance does have traffic criteria, and in the first conditional use application, that was one of the bases for the board to deny it, because they felt that the applicant had not proven what the zoning ordinance required with respect to traffic improvements and traffic mitigation. That will be evaluated by the township's traffic engineer on this application to determine whether or not he believes in his recommendation as to whether or not it adequately mitigated the impact from the development. But without an expert, the Board of Supervisors has to rely upon expert testimony, whether it's the applicant's testimony they find too credible, or townships, or a party. It can't just be neighbors getting up and saying, and trust me, I live here too, so I sit in this traffic. It just can't be, oh, I don't want, I sit here for 10 minutes. That's not enough for a court to rely upon to deny it or to impose a condition. So it has to be based on somebody who, with credentials, who understands the requirements that PennDOT has for doing these traffic counts and understands what is feasible to do as far as improvements. So for example, the 202, 926, the township can't require Toll Brothers to go and condemn land. They don't have that power under the law. If PennDOT says it must be done, PennDOT's a condemning authority. They have the power to condemn land both in Thornbury and Westtown. Westtown can't condemn land in Thornbury. So you can't impose upon them something that the law doesn't allow them to do. I know it's a little bit more than what you asked for, but it's important to understand that conditions can't just be put together because we think that's a good idea. It has to be based on evidence presented to the board.
And Al thanks Chris, preferred to the answer. Go ahead.
Yeah, so your traffic engineer had mentioned that intersection delays are cumulative. So I was wondering if you've looked at the cumulative delay of 202 and 926 down to 926 and the proposed development that will intersect with Bridlewood, and then to 926 and South New Street, because that's currently the traffic pattern. So it would be assumed that any increase in traffic would also affect all three of those intersections, instead of just assuming that the traffic pattern is at one individual at a time.
So the analysis is completed that it gives results at individual intersections, but it's a comprehensive analysis. So the model is evaluating all the intersections together, but the reporting, in order to be able to have a fair comparison between conditions, it reports results for individual intersections.
You want to say something?
Yeah, Nicole, I think she was asking, did you do an arterial travel time analysis that took the travel through all of those intersections and that and the other?
We did not do an arterial analysis, as it is not required in either the township or the PennDOT standards.
Any other questions?
Yeah, so you mentioned that the roads would be up for dedication. So until they're dedicated, you anticipate children to be picked up at bus stops on West Pleasant Grove Road or the connector road?
We don't know at this point, but, you know, internally and the neighborhood is the best place to have them picked up.
So this is what we jump in on that. That's a detail that would have to be worked out. If this conditional use was approved and they went through land development, that's a detail that happens during the land development process. That's a that's a discussion between Mr. Scanlon or Dr. Scanlon and the developer and the township. That discussion happens often.
Clearly, it's a good question, and it,
Yeah.
and it is one that would have to be addressed later on in the process.
I got to stop you there now. Ma'am? Sir?
Hi, John Hillian, 1164 Lake Drive. A couple of questions. You said that the inspections and visualizations can be done anytime between April and November. Could you tell me what months you used to make your determinations?
That is, again, as I mentioned, the township's code. I need to reference the traffic counts in the study.